Julianna, what was the crowd like? We can just see people behind Mr. Trump, but I want to get a sense beyond the reporters. What were people saying? What were they doing?
Well, it's kind of a zoo here, Vlad. Just before Trump took to the podium, you saw his staff trying to wrangle a bunch of people. We don't know whether they were just people who happened to be here. An interesting person who Trump pointed out toward the end is that the Speaker of the House of Indonesia was here to meet with Trump later, and of course he was talking about this in the context of him knowing international affairs and knowing how to craft deals, and being somebody, a leader who could perform on the world stage if he's elected president.
And Julianna, I mean, so it's interesting. The crowd there, they seemed to be very exuberant, as Mr. Trump pointed out a couple of points, especially when he went on the attack. Is that the sense that you were getting from the crowd there, that they're all sort of standing behind him physically and literally?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a different crowd than what's going to show up at a Trump campaign rally in Iowa and South Carolina or any early voting state. So I'm not sure that Trump was necessarily delivering his message for the crowd behind him, but rather to his supporters, essentially to say, look, I have been the anti-establishment candidate. You have brought me here. And now in signing this pledge, I am here to stay. And this is something that I had to do. I've been arguing to be treated fairly, to have the respect of the Republican Party, and saying, okay, I've gotten it now. Let's move forward and continue to ride these waves of polls, which
Julianna,
he continued to point to.
Yeah, Julianna, I'm also curious. There were a couple of questions that were asked of Mr. Trump by reporters, and we couldn't hear what they were, but a couple of times he said, that's not the time and place for that. I'm not going to answer that. I don't know if you were able to hear what those questions were.
Yeah, actually, I thought one of the most interesting questions that he was asked was one of the reporters here was asking him about President Obama's birth certificate. And when you think of the birther movement, Donald Trump has been one of the loudest voices over the past several years. And Trump said, I don't want to go there. I want to talk about jobs. And Vlad, what that tells us, I mean, even Republicans affiliated with rival campaigns have sort of chuckled and conceded that over the past several weeks, you've seen Donald Trump becoming a better candidate. And so by saying, no, I want to talk about jobs, I don't want to talk about Barack Obama's birth certificate. Another time where he said, when he was asked about Jeb Bush and negative ads that Bush would be running against Trump, he pivoted and he said, look, I've never had negative ads run against me, but all you have to know, speaking to voters out there, is those ads are being paid for by special interests, by lobbyists, and that he's the only candidate who's a self-funder, who's funding his own campaign. So, his talking points are kind of catered and tailored now a little more clearly and succinctly to what a lot of voters are saying in focus groups, and money in politics, special interests. That's very key right now.
Yeah, Julianna, in fact, that's a great point. Something that I was remarking upon as I was listening to Mr. Trump make those comments. It does sound that he is gotten more and more on message, on point. He's not as scattershot as he was in the early days of his campaign. He is almost sounding presidential.
Well, and another thing, you see him sort of softening his rhetoric on immigration. So on the one hand, he says, yes, we need to build a wall. That talking point he is still sticking to. But he also made a point of saying, I want to have a wide open door for immigrants to come into this country legally. And so you just can see him trying to walk the tightrope here. And I don't know about it sounding more presidential, but certainly sounding more like a candidate.
Julianna Goldman reporting from Trump Tower. Julianna, thank you very much. Let's go back to Caitlin Huey-Burns, who's in Washington, D.C. With Real Clear Politics. Yeah, Caitlin, that's something that I was going to ask you about earlier. It seemed, just in listening, and I wrote this down, that he is sounding more like a presidential candidate.
He is. That's a great point. And we have seen this over the past couple of weeks, not only in his public appearances, but also he is organizing a campaign on the ground in these early states. And he is hiring staff and expanding his campaign and really putting in place an organization in some of these places. And as we've talked about before, establishing that infrastructure in Iowa is really key to turning people out in the caucuses and really capturing, sustaining, and turning that momentum into actual caucus support. So that is an interesting aspect of this as well, and another sign that he's taking this seriously.
Yeah, and so speaking of Jeb Bush, he talked a lot about Jeb Bush in his comments today. One of the things that Governor Bush has been doing is trying to get his supporters and people in the country to recognize the fact that Donald Trump isn't what he's calling a true conservative. Now, Trump has hit back and said, look, Ronald Reagan also changed sides as he grew older, as he ultimately decided to run for the presidency as a Republican. He had started out as a Democrat. And then Trump hit back with something that I don't think Governor Bush was expecting. He hit him back on the fact that Jeb Bush was speaking in Spanish yesterday, and we have a bit of that sound. Let me play that sound for you, and then we'll talk out of it.
So here I am, a candidate for President of the United States, believing that we should campaign con brazos abiertos, with our arms wide open, making an appeal to people that our days can be brighter if we fix these big, complex things, and that I have the leadership skills to make it so. I hope that you'll join me in this more hopeful, optimistic method, one that will lead us to a better place.
All right, so out of that, Donald Trump then criticized Governor Bush, saying he should lead by speaking English when he's in the United States. What do you make of those comments? I mean, you know, if he wants to bring in, he says that he has a lot of Hispanic supporters. Donald Trump says that. Is that a way to get them over to his side?
I wouldn't think so. And remember, I mean, we're talking about the RNC today, and after the 2012 campaign, remember that autopsy report that they did after Mitt Romney lost the Latino vote by a significant margin. And Republicans since then have been trying to, or at least been talking about expanding the party, reaching out to minorities, reaching out to women, expanding the base, and turning out that support in the polls, and have made a big deal about, how influential that is when it comes to the electoral process. So this is really what Trump's been doing has really contradicted that effort by Republicans more generally, but also specifically Jeb Bush, who has been campaigning. He is bilingual. His wife is a Mexican immigrant, and he talks about that a lot in introducing himself to voters and getting voters to get to know him. So that is, where we're seeing this really direct contrast here. And that clip that you played of Jeb Bush, I will say that, I've been to several of Jeb Bush's town halls over the past several months, and he is becoming more energized by this, in part mostly because Donald Trump has gotten under his skin, but he's really trying to drive that contrast home and remind Republican voters in a Republican primary where his chief opponent's positions are. So this is, very fundamental campaign strategy here, but kind of magnified.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Real Clear Politics in Washington, D.C. for us, breaking this all down. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.